2 weeks I'm back for the TAB.
Good morning, everyone.
It's like the Outdoor Association of America, and I'm speaking on the Latina Power Shift, which we also are having.
Good morning, folks.
But it's kind of newer for me too. It's been a while since I've been at the top of this.
Folks, we're going to get started now. Lisette? Good morning, everyone. Hi, good morning. I'm Cynthia Corso, Editor-in-Chief of Hispanic Market Weekly, and I hope everyone's day 2 at Hispanicize is off to a good start. Before introducing our panelists, I want to acknowledge that this session is being sponsored by Bowdoin Public Relations, and they're off to a great year. They include clients like Target, McDonald's, and Cricket Wireless. They're the agency of record for several of those clients. And now our panelists, Eliana Murillo, Head of Multicultural Marketing at Google, Jason Ribeiro, Multicultural Marketing Manager at Sherwin-Williams, Nidia Sagun, Group Manager, Brand Marketing Multicultural at Target, and Stacy. You guys are popular this morning. And Stacy De Armas, VP of Community Alliances, Events, and Engagement at Nielsen.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, trends we know are key in terms of marketing and influencing strategy, messaging, and even creative. And Hispanics are clearly in the lead when it comes to setting new trends. So folks, what are we seeing in terms of trends for 2014? What do you say are the top ones? You guys can take turns, whoever wants to jump in.
I can jump in. Are these on? Can you guys hear me? Hi, Nidia with Target. I would say it's interesting because when really just even speaking about being on this panel and thinking about Hispanic market trends, what's interesting to me, is it really about Hispanic trends, or is it the influence of the Hispanic market on trends that are relevant today? So when I think about what's really sort of innovative in marketing overall, and we all know the focus of digital, of mobile, of social, I think that's where you look at the intersection of what, knowing that Hispanics are sort of critical mass, what is their influence on those channels, and how are we really sort of conforming some of these channels to be even more relevant and leading with Hispanic guests at the core of everything that we do. So for me, it is about trends per se, but not necessarily Hispanic, because to me they are organically embedded. It is just a known fact that they're driving a lot of the media consumption that's out there. So how do we make those channels more relevant to this consumer set?
Yeah, and I would add that what's important about that is really understanding the drivers, right? So we know that there is an incredible increase in digital consumption, but what are the attitudinal drivers behind that? And that's going to be very specific and have nuances in the Hispanic market that don't necessarily exist in the general market, or exist to a different degree. So understanding those drivers and those nuances is what is really going to bring brands to light for the Hispanic consumer. And there you have it.
I'll add that I think for all of us, the underlying theme of what is new and trending is that any Latino consumer that interacts with any of our brands, or any brand in general, is doing that through technology now. So much traffic is through mobile, and so much time is spent on YouTube and any video platform. And so the impact of social media, video, and mobile is really what's driving a lot of consumers to actually go and find the products, to interact with them, to share about them. Latinos are 4 times as likely to share branded content over general market. So there's a huge opportunity that I think marketers are becoming aware. I think Latinos are the ones driving us. They're the ones informing us how they want to engage with the brand, because they're already doing it. So I think it's a very reactive time in marketing, where the consumer is telling the marketer what they want, and the marketer has to then create a strategy around how do you meet the user where they are.
Yeah, and understanding, again, I think when that equation, or if it's possible to sort of change it, well, I guess then we'd all know exactly what we're doing, right? But to understand what are those drivers. And that's a big part of what we're doing at Nielsen, is trying to understand the attitudinal drivers behind what is making those differences. Mm-hmm. So if you have the answer, please. We're working on it.
Jason, Hispanics are leading the way in terms of new mortgages. And I know that Sherwin-Williams has been adopting new modes for engagement, communication, and reaching these coveted consumers. What are you guys doing?
Sure. I mean, interesting fact, actually 40% of the net new households that will be created over the next 10 years, that's about 14 million households, will be Hispanics. You know, and it's assumed that by 2020, it'll be half of them will be all Hispanics. So that's a huge number. And the place that we play in, you know, we want to make sure that we hit that consumer right at the path of purchase, which is, you know, not very easy. Sometimes it's like right at the time they're deciding to buy a home. And so from our research, we found out that really, you know, folks are, especially kind of our unacculturated, bicultural consumer, is very actively online seeking for this kind of color inspiration. And so what we did is we created those platforms online and then also on social and responded to that with a new website this year and then, you know, speaking to them during the traditional new media, so.
Great. And in terms of moving beyond traditional and social media and mobile, we know those are probably three of the hot topics these days, but how do you go beyond that for that one-on-one relationship with these consumers? Any other engagement modes, engagement methods that brands are using?
Kind of referencing back to what I mentioned a little earlier, one of the most powerful dynamics we're seeing is the brand that's allowing the consumer to play a role in shaping their brand, in the sense that consumers right now, if you were in the panel yesterday, we talked about Gen Z, the most influential demographic we have, and our young millennials who are, you know, part of Gen Z, which is about the forces curation, community, content, creativity. So they want to play a role in curating what they're consuming, so what ads they're watching, what YouTube videos they're watching. They want to have a choice in that. They also want to create their own content. So you see, I mean, how many of you know the Hot Cheetos and Takis YouTube video? That was not done by PepsiCo or any other brand. Those are just some young kids who made a YouTube video about their two favorite brands of chips, and it went viral. And if you looked it up on YouTube, it has hundreds of thousands of views, if not millions at this point, and the brand wasn't responsible. And so that one-to-one connection between a brand and a consumer, the consumer is empowered. It's the brand's responsibility to give them material to work with. So I think that's where you see a lot of relationships building between a brand and a consumer, because beyond social media, it starts with social media, right? That's where people are sharing their content, but now they want to play a role with you. They feel so empowered that they think they can even create creative and video just like the marketer can. So they want a seat at the table with you. So I think as marketers, it's important to take those insights. What are the consumers saying? Yesterday, I asked people to send me tweets to Soy Google and tell me what products you want to learn about. And now, right now, there's another panel by my Google team, and I hope if this is being live streamed that people are watching there too. There's a panel on Google products, and I asked my team, what are you guys ready to talk about? And they said, I'm so glad you asked the question yesterday of what people want to learn about, because now we changed our whole presentation, more catered to the audience. So we literally took insights from yesterday's conversation to now shape the presentation we're doing today. And that's just one instance. It could have been a campaign, it could have been a spot on TV or on digital. That conversation is really important. And beyond, for Latinos, it's a bilingual conversation. It's really thinking about what language are they speaking to. The language is actually cultural relevance, not just English, Spanish.
I'd like to add to that. I think, Eliana, you're spot on in just really speaking to the turnaround time and being able to stay relevant and current with consumers and with our guests in particular. And I think it's no longer the traditional approach of, you know, taking X amount of time to develop a campaign. I think we really need to be listening to what they're saying. And so that's where social, digital, and mobile really give us an opportunity to understand their needs, what they're thinking about, what they're looking for, and be able to react in a very flexible, nimble, and quick way. And so it's really about how do we take the traditional forms of marketing and actually make them digestible, turn them around quickly so that we can push it out through social media and stay relevant. If you continue to go down the path of your more traditional channels, it feels like you're not going to be staying in the conversation as quickly as these guests are and consumers are really consuming that content.
And, you know, there's certainly a place. There's a place for traditional media, you know, where, and it's still necessary, but what it takes in order to be able to do what we're talking about here is a bold brand. And I think that's really the bottom line. You know, turning over this kind of marketing or these sorts of ideas into the hands of the consumer, certainly there's an element of risk, but it takes a bold brand with a lot of confidence to be able to do something like that, let it go, and let it go quick to market.
I'd like to add to that a little bit, but kind of take the opposite in the way that, you know, Sometimes I think, when I hear like this new media and the newest and the best and everything, and it's like, well, how can we make sure that the platforms that we're on right now, that we're actually being successful at and actually engaging in the right way? And so the conversations that we're having, the quality of our conversations, the quality of the people that we interact with, these are all important things for us, and that's actually helped us as well develop some of our products and our colors selections that we have going on. This past year, we launched something specifically to the Caribbean, the Puerto Rico, and that all came from our designers, their input into that and those color palettes and selections. And hopefully we can continue to do that as you're engaging with us and our brands, that you're really the ones that are determining the future of what we put out there.
Stacy, the numbers, we all know, and most of us can probably recite them, the purchasing power, the population numbers. How can brands use those numbers, or how are they already using those numbers to move beyond what has been done all the time and to incorporate these numbers into some of the trends we're seeing now?
Well, I think we spoke about that, a little bit already. Certainly, numbers and figures guide you, and they give you the guardrails within which to work. But again, being able to make those bold decisions, a lot of that is based on gut, right? And again, we've talked about sort of attitudinal data, but certainly the figures are there, and that should be, in and of itself, a major driver for marketers to take another look at doing something alternative with the Hispanic market and believing in that. But again, it sort of centers back on really being a bold brand. Numbers are fantastic. It's what we base all of our decisions on, and it's certainly very important to everybody in this room and all of our brands. But there's this other sort of element that we've been talking quite a bit about already, which is this attitudinal sort of driver. What is it? What is that cultural nuance that's making a difference in the market? And I think that's a new area of focus, certainly, that we're very interested in, and I'm sensing from this group and this panel that it's very important to this group as well.
Nydia, how has Target's outreach evolved over the past, say, 5 years?
Well, I think it's a timely question, and just to kind of build off of what Stacy was saying, is that it's almost teeing up the topic that we're going to be talking about tomorrow, and the total market debate, right? Is it cross-cultural? Is it total market? I think from a Target perspective, what we've really done is, again, recognize the influence that the Hispanic market has on our brand across various categories, and it's really taking those insights and those numbers and being very data-driven about how we really go to market. And I think what's interesting is that there is a place where, total market by definition, and everyone has their own, so this is mine, is really just finding the universal truth across all consumer segments and going to market that way. Whereas cross-cultural, in my mind, still very much is leading with multicultural insight without alienating the general market population. And I think that's where there's room for both, and that's really where those cultural nuances that we talk about, not everyone is going to like everything the same way, not everyone's going to consume the exact same type of content. There's insight for a reason, and so I think there's a fine balance of both. And so at Target, that's really the approach that we've taken, where there's moments, and just as an example, we talked a little bit earlier, Stacy, about digital music. We launched Shakira, and we also launched Juanes this year. And so for my team, it's really, how are we really driving deeper hyper-cultural relevance with this consumer set through music with artists like Juanes. We did Prince Royce last year, we did Alejandro Fernandez, and then also looking at sort of our overall general approach in music and taking an artist like Shakira that to me is very cross-cultural, right? She's very cross-cultural and still driving that relevance, and looking at those two bodies of work and how they really complement each other. And so, and music is just one example. Obviously in retail we have so many different categories, but another one would be with Baby, and it's how do we just integrate cultural nuances or even language and music that we know is just such a passion point into our advertising to really emotionally connect with these guests. And we've seen tremendous success with it. Another spot that we did last year is our summer spot, where that was actually not specifically, it was sort of a general market approach, but we used Ilia Kuriaki in the Valderrama song, because for us, music transcends language as well, and it was more of a creative decision because it really laddered up to the creative vision of the spot, and not specifically a Hispanic targeted initiative. But again, seeing the influence of Hispanics in mainstream media, it's just becoming a part of our everyday and our DNA.
And if I can just add to, the music piece she was talking about, we know the statistics, right? Latinos are much more likely to to actually download or stream digital music, more devices per household. And so that's the basis, right, for what we want to do. Those are the sort of the hard figures, but it's that qualitative element. How then do we do what you said precisely, which is go deeper? So the figures, just to go back to the sort of the opening of that question, the figures again are the guardrails. It sort of gives you license to get in and then to explore and take it a little bit further. And the numbers are there and they're very strong. And I know we don't need to necessarily go over all of them here because we all know them. But I wanted to add, very specifically to your music reference. I feel very strongly about that.
And I think what's most compelling about the data is what moves Hispanic marketing from an afterthought to core strategy. Once you show someone the numbers, it's just inevitable. It's very easy to understand
Sort
at
of
that point.
license,
Yeah.
right? Then you can.
Everyone at this point knows the math. As you said, we don't have to go over all the numbers, but when they're so strong that it can't be an afterthought, or else you will not be successful at your core strategy. You will miss the mark, and the people that are driving consumption, as we said, the outreach should be determined by those figures.
And Jason, for you, 2 words, total market.
Oh, gosh. We have to get into that.
Everyone's responsibility. Two words.
She gave you the 2, you give them.
I give you, I'm sorry.
No.
I totally didn't get that. Okay. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so, yeah, that's really, at the end of the day is that, we're talking about kind of how we structure internally. We could say, we want to create this, because that's what we're doing right now, really kind of developing internally and seeing which way we go forward. And we could say, well, let's create our own silo and then go from there. But really, it's kind of making sure that everybody that's a marketer within my organization has some sort of responsibility to driving that multicultural business. And it's not just myself, because it gets a little bit tiring being the only one that's preaching that. So.
Sure.
How does the total market, general market, respond to the more Hispanic-influenced palette you develop? Because it's really purely cultural expression.
I think people like that. I think people, you're talking about what's the number one, I think, non-Hispanic trend, and it's like dancing salsa, right? So I think our culture is just intoxicating. People love it, and they want to be a part of that and show colors. And so I think it's been responding very well for it. So, yeah, we get no pushback on that end.
Well, I think and there's actually quite a lot of discussion about, the influence, things like that. When you talk about a palette, I think you said it was like Puerto Rican influenced or Caribbean influence of paint coming out. It's definitely attractive, certainly to the general market, but for maybe a whole other set of attitudinal drivers we keep talking about, right? It is, it's trendy, it's hot, it's sexy. People want to be, please don't tweet that part, please. But people want to be, they want to be connected to that Latino cultural piece. And so for them, there's a whole different set of drivers that are driving them toward that. And I think that's an interesting balance for marketers, right? When you look at developing something that definitely touches those nuances with the key market, but also sort of leaves the door open in many ways for the general market to enjoy those particular products. Many marketers do it very well, and I think what you're describing today is right on target.
No pun intended.
With the growing presence of millennials or Gen Zs, do we see the influence working by them towards the older Hispanic population, or is it still the parents influencing?
I think it's definitely relevant. I see how the young millennials are educating their parents on how to use technology, and now you see more and more people with smartphones who before probably never would have thought to have that. I have Latino Googler coworkers who say, I taught my dad how to text, and now he's posting on Google Plus, and he's doing all these things, and they're just learning because they're finally being really encouraged by family. I think familia is number one for all of us, and for family to feel like they're being brought on, their hand is being, I was going to hold your hand, their hand is being held to bring them into the digital world. They're translating more than language. They're translating between the two worlds that they live in, the digital world and then their familia's more traditional roots. So I think it definitely goes both ways. And then, of course, with millennials being more tech savvy, they're the ones who search for things that their parents are interested in. They're going to buy a new TV, they're going to buy X product, they're Googling it. We see that over 70% of all of all purchases of services and goods are Googled before they're made. So if they're not the one searching for it, they're doing it on behalf of their family. And so that's really, it's interesting to see how digital plays a role in connecting the family in that sense too.
I think what's interesting about that, and it's just been fascinating to me, is how sort of this online, digital, mobile, social consumption is really behavior that is innate for the Hispanic market. Technology has just enabled them to be able to leverage other tools and resources to be able to be, expressive, to share their opinion, to reach out to family, to, just stay very connected. And so when I hear people talk about it's a new insight, Hispanics, and they overshare, and I'm like, we always have. It's just now we can do it on Facebook and Twitter. So I think it's just fascinating that it is very much of the behavior that we've seen historically, but seeing it migrate online is just fascinating.
Your 4 brands are obviously highly active in the Hispanic market. Are other brands that are still on the sidelines that are considering whether to do a deep dive, do they really understand not just the importance of the Hispanic market, but that influence, that role they're having on all sorts of sectors or categories?
I mean, I can't really speak for other brands, but I certainly think that it is. It's not a secret anymore. I think everyone is well aware of the influence. The research certainly backs that up. I think the challenge is for some brands there is a sense of still potentially maybe discomfort or lack of understanding. And this could take us back to the total market discussion, which I'm not going to touch either, but there is that important element of understanding the nuances that are going to make or break a campaign. And we can all think of, probably 5 offhand campaigns that were intended to really drive maybe some multicultural business and really did not do that. Right, did the opposite, and even things that are current. I'm not even talking about old examples. So I do think there are some brands that are still kind of putting their toe in the water, but the research is entirely behind moving forward and moving boldly.
I think you can definitely feel like a risk. I think we talked about the data, how important that is. People see the numbers and understand that they have to do something. And I think the fear can be in just how do you do it in the right way, because Latinos are going to respond. If they like it or they don't, they will tell you. We have very strong opinions. And I think what is key is making sure that any brand is taking its focus group research really seriously, adding the qualitative, the quantitative, but I also think it's the Latinos at those respective companies. You don't have to be specifically doing multicultural, but before I had this role, I was always sharing insights and making it feel real, because I think a lot of times marketers forget that they're reaching people. It's not a data set. You can actually go ask the person, how do you feel about this or this? I ask my family all the time. I go home and I'm in a community of small business owners and I ask them, what do you want to learn? How is this brand reaching you? To the point we made before, it's a conversation, and I think that's where, that is the challenge and the biggest opportunity, because when people get it right, you get Latinos brand trust. We don't have to go back into that conversation, but we know how strongly Latinos feel about brands when they care for them. And when you earn their love and trust based on data, based on very smart conversations, you can take those risks that won't feel so risky when you take them.
I want to add to that. I think you made a great mention, because there are a lot of companies that are spending a lot of money on this, but there are very few that actually are taking the time to engage with you one-on-one, kind of like what we're doing here with Hispanicize, and that's very important. I've always been of the mindset that a successful market penetration strategy and marketing campaign goes hand in hand with kind of a public affairs, public relations campaign that many times I think sometimes marketers don't view that as important, but within the Hispanic realm, I think it goes even further value that you're engaging with folks one-on-one, that you're attending their events, you're attending their community events, and that's something that I want to continue to push within our company, that we have to be on the ground and not just mass media the whole time. We could buy it, invest all our money in that, and that's things that companies are doing. So congrats to everybody else.
Yeah, I want to add to that. That's a strong point. I've been here talking a little bit about data and the research side, but developing a relationship with the Hispanic consumer for us at Nielsen is very important. It's a huge part of, obviously, everything that we do in terms of ensuring that we have a great sample, very frankly, in everything, in all the different panels and things that we have. So a big part of what we do is not just, we're here talking about data and sort of the research and the brand side, But for us at Nielsen, developing that relationship is really important to us, and we work very hard at it. We are in the community, and we are at events, and we're at other social things that help us connect one-on-one, grassroots, on the ground, with Latinos to remind them that we are here, Nielsen is here, to make sure that they're represented, their thoughts, their opinions, and their voice. And when we acquire all that data back from those people, they're more likely then to agree to participate with us. And when we acquire that data, it's really what ends up driving all the things that we're talking about here. So it's another element of what we do, but I wanted to make sure to mention that to us, as a brand, Latinos, the African American market, the Asian market, and sort of this very broad set of multicultural markets are very important to us on a very personal level.
Are there specific markets that are gaining additional attention beyond the New Yorks, Miamis, Los Angeleses?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that just because of housing. I mean, that's kind of, those were really where the key drivers, So for us, places where new Hispanic businesses were started, the Arkansas of the world, the South, North Carolinas. I see someone raising the roof over there. I didn't know we still did that. I like that, bringing it back. Yeah, so those were key drivers, especially kind of in the labor area. So those were always important, and so I think we've always said, wherever we can do it well, and also, not to mention, sometimes LA kind of pushes us out because it's so expensive sometimes, but anyways.
Nydia, in terms of grassroots or engagement, what has Target been doing?
Well, I think to Jason's point, I mean, we've done a ton, and us even being here at Hispanicize is extremely important for us to really stay connected to our guests and really the Hispanic market. We do a variety of events throughout the year. I think that there's that also coupled with even the relationship. Again, how do we migrate that to digital, social, and mobile? I think there's opportunity there to also still have that personalized connection even through those social mediums as well. So we've done a ton, and every initiative that we evaluate, we definitely look at that. It's a critical component on how do we really take this to a more personalized level with our guest base.
Eliana, I know Google has been doing a lot in terms of small businesses and working directly with them. Can you tell us a bit about what you all are doing?
Sure. Small businesses are what Latinos do best. We create more small businesses than any other demographic in the country, which is remarkable. My family has a small business. We make tequila, like organic tequila, and all of my neighbors have small businesses, so it's something very real to me. And that's something that's insight that I bring to Google, and I make sure that we're being relevant, not prescribing things to small businesses that they don't have time to do. My dad is very busy, and if I tell him to do some really lofty campaign, he's going to say, "Mija, I don't have time." So try to make it very realistic for them. But some of the campaigns we've seen, the insight is more than half of all small businesses don't have a website. That means they are invisible completely on the internet. And what I mentioned before, the 70% of all purchases that are made there are first searched. When I Google something, I don't want to buy it. If a Latino business isn't there, there's no way they'll get my business. So that's really important to us because we really support the growth of the web, and we see how small businesses are key to that, to the economy, to the e-commerce online. And so we started Get Your Business Online. Shout out to my agency, República, who helped us pull it off for the Latino audience. So it was actually a really cool initiative. It's still going. We launched for general market for everyone. General market to us is just everybody, because everyone is online. We went to all 50 states, had some really awesome events, but the idea is that Google wants to help small businesses. And the best way we can do that is with partnering with local chambers of commerce, organizations across the board, to give small businesses a free website for a year. After that's very inexpensive, under $10 a month. But more than the website is to actually guide them and giving them resources, tools, information, anything we can to make sure they feel supported online, because it can be a little intimidating, especially if you've never done it before. And sometimes, no matter what language you speak, sometimes your kid is the one teaching you how to use the internet, right? So I see nods. I mean, I sit with my parents and teach them how to use their smartphones. Think about launching a business on the internet, right? So we launched it for the more Spanish-dominant community as well, because we knew Latinos are already able to take advantage of the general initiative. So then we did Get Your Business Online con Google. That's the little bit of translating I was able to do with it. And we brought that we did 2 events, Miami and LA, but the really big offer was just having a presence online, even talking to radio stations. It's both digital and on the ground and on radio waves to make sure people hear about it. And we constantly have workshops around the country working, like I presented last year at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce doing a workshop to empower the local chambers of commerce across the country to bring these resources back on the ground. And so that's one example of a lot of different initiatives we have. We have a lot, this week we just did Get Your Business Online Week, and that was pretty major for us as well. Just keeping the conversation going about how important it is. It's not once a month during Small Business Week when everyone cares about small businesses, it's every day, because for me, the most important part is Latinas are building businesses faster than any other demographic. They're growing at 2 times the national rate. That's huge. So if we don't arm them with the right technology, how are they going to be relevant to grow that business further and make sure it's sustainable for their families? Anyway, got on my soapbox. Thank you.
In terms of language, we've heard both sides of the equation. There's been some negative reaction to English language aimed at Hispanics. Some people criticize the whole Spanglish component in a Spanish language commercial. What is your take on this? Nydia, you're smiling. Go for it.
So I'm sure a lot of you know, just from our baby campaign and our summer campaign, we've done that a lot. And for us, it's the reality that this is reflective of the general market is the multicultural market, right? It's representative of Hispanic. And particularly when we leverage music, we really believe that music transcends language, right? It's about the emotion that it evokes and really back to the connection and really the vision of what we were trying to do creatively, less about we're using this language for this reason. I also believe that I think over time, language will become more of an emotional connection versus a functional need, but the reality is that in the state of the state today, there's still a need to be very relevant in language, you know, through those in-language mediums, but I think at times it can be a creative tactic, at times it can be leveraged to, you know, evoke an emotion. I think it really depends on what your strategy is and who you're targeting specifically.
You know, I
Just-
just want to add, I think that's a really strong point, and I hope somebody tweeted that, an emotional connection versus a functional need eventually. I think that's really important. And, you know, we certainly see in the data at Nielsen, we certainly see that people that are even bilingual, they have a preference, whether they choose to speak English or they choose to speak Spanish, and when and how they do that. And actually, later today, we're speaking in another panel where we're talking about the Latina Power Shift. My colleague Monica Gil, who's here, will be speaking about it. And I know she'll be talking a little bit about something called, you know, ambicultural, what we're calling it. And it's really the ability to sort of seamlessly transcend. I don't want to take her thunder away, but you know what you just said really sort of drove that home. The emotional, eventually, you know, long-term sort of language being an emotional connection versus entirely functional, and maybe not in totality, but at least for some segment of the population. I think that's again sort of that nuance or the driver.
Another shout out to Monica. I like to reference the Latina Power Shift's gradient of language use. So Monica, shout out, I always talk about it. It's really compelling to see that only 9% of Latinas use the internet exclusively in Spanish. And 21 or 24, and you can't tweet that number because I can't remember, but 21 or
right here,
24.
I'll look it up.
Okay, thank you. We're tag teaming. Just over 20%, let's say that, 20+% use it exclusively in English. So one of the things we're always looking at is how do you make culture relevant on the web? So that's the space I'm in. We all have different channels we're looking at, but because I am with Google and we're looking at Google, YouTube, different platforms, what are they doing? What language are they using? And yeah, the key is cultural relevance more than language. But there is distinction. Sometimes Latinos like saying language because Spanish because it is an emotional connection. Otherwise, they think I don't speak English? So you really have to listen to what they're doing. Something we do a lot is look at analytics. So we have Google Analytics looking at different websites that we find interesting that Latinos traffic a lot. Where is the inbound traffic coming from? Are they going from Univision.com and ending up on a Sherwin-Williams website so you know that they're consuming content in Spanish? Are they going from Google search in English onto a different site? You can really see what language, just looking at the content. Content is key for SEO. What language are you presenting that? And how can you follow the user across the web, understanding the language preferences? Because they may be switching between English and Spanish perfectly seamlessly. And that makes it very challenging as a marketer. How do you juggle languages and switching back and forth? But that's the world we live in.
And that I think goes back to those attitudinal drivers, and I think something that we'll discuss, you know, she'll discuss a little bit later today. I do have the statistics. It's 9% only Spanish, 15% mostly, and 31% both Spanish and English equally. You can download this online, but also, again, before we've entirely stolen your session, you'll hear more about it this afternoon at 2 o'clock.
I actually have a question for you, Stacy and Eliana. How much of that do you think that stat is driven by lack of content in language being served up?
I think The web, speaking specifically to the internet, the web was built in English. So the country was also built in English. So Latinos are already used to having to struggle and figure it out, right? So they're expecting English generally. The thing is, even if they like Spanish, the truth is, they're going to question it if it's just in Spanish. They'll read it in Spanish, and then they'll go find the English version to make sure they're getting the same deal. They don't want a lesser quality version of it. The lack of information available and what we see brands going, I think we see some innovation around brands understanding this. We see a lot of, like, Orgullosa.com is here. They have a lot of great content. P&G has done a good job with that. There are examples of brands going into the direction of more language-based content because lifestyle is so important to us across the board. But no, I think it's completely appropriate to talk about the historical context for the web of what Latinos expect and what they wish for in the future.
And I think I would also add, I think it does have something to do with, you know, the content that's available. I can tell you, even in my personal experience, I have some family here in Miami, and watching them, you know, be on, definitely out of this demographic, but watching them, you know, Google things around. Specifically, they were looking for boleros on YouTube, and watching these videos from like the 40s. They're not even videos; they're just like stills, you know. But really seamlessly using this, knowing that English is not their really even. It's almost non-existent now at this point. It's pretty much gone since they live here in Miami. But watching them just navigate and knowing really kind of where they want to be, but really the options that they have in front of them and what they have to do. So they certainly consume a certain amount in Spanish. And again, this is a personal experience. They consume a lot of the internet in Spanish, but probably the vast majority is to some degree English, and it may have something to do with, you know, I certainly think it does with what's available.
Yeah, we recently launched, and this is a good point, kind of segue into the content and all. We made a determination, kind of looking at other retailers. You know, we see where they'll fully translate their website, and you know, it's a significant investment, and then a year later it's pulled. And so we said, you know, we don't need to go down that same track, because we are seeing that people are apt to, as far as on the inbound side, really looking at the content that's out there. So our SW Latino is really just all about content. That's all it really is. It's not about, it doesn't have the full functionality as our main corporate website, because we're finding that once they do click through, they're able to navigate kind of, if we do kind of go into the e-commerce site, they're very comfortable navigating kind of an e-commerce situation, because they're already doing that, like you were mentioning. They're already accustomed to being a part of that, but they appreciate that we're going far and above and beyond, and saying we want to give you content that's relevant to you as a consumer. So. And
when we circle back to what we were saying earlier, sort of putting, you know, with brands, sort of putting their, you know, foot in the water, or you know, experimenting in different ways. I know some brands are also starting with just a mobile app. You know, doing an in-language mobile app. I know Javier, who's here, just recently did something like that with Dunkin'. Shout out. And I think they had great success with it, and it's a great way to, you know, and really, too, backing up again, knowing that Latinos are sort of 10% higher, you know, more likely to be using digital devices, even than the internet. Starting out with something like a mobile app, in many ways, maybe isn't really kind of testing the waters. Maybe that's just sort of the way, you know, people are moving forward. When you look at the demographic, that's very progressive. So that could be, you know, another channel.
I'll just say, at Google, we say mobile first. Something to keep in mind.
Right, okay, so there you go, way ahead of the game.
Would you say that the responsibility for that content lies more with media, more with the brand, or is it basically shared responsibility and working together?
I would say that it's shared responsibility. You really can't do one without the other. And you could develop the most amazing content and not place it in the right channel, and it's not going to do well. So it's really got to be in sync, and it can't work independently in my mind.
I see a lot of people creating content on YouTube, for example. They do a phenomenal job, and they come to me and say, why is no one seeing this? What's the problem? It's amazing. We know it's great. I show my family, they love it. We showed some focus group people, they loved it. What's the problem? And they're not putting it in the right channels in front of people. You need to push it out through it any way you can. And so content, yeah, that's definitely a priority of the marketer. But understanding the user and where they are, where they're trafficking, what channels they're listening to, watching, touching with their mobile devices, how do you push it out toward them? And then it is definitely a shared responsibility, and the outcome is amazing when you just kind of balance the two.
Is the issue of translate versus transcreate, is that still relevant today, given all the changes we've seen in both technology, media consumption habits, language?
I'll jump in. I mean, I think it really depends on where you start, right? I think it all goes back to the insights that are driving your strategy and who you're targeting and how you're developing the content. Do I think there's still a place maybe for transcreating? It depends on if you started with a base campaign and a spot that was rooted in relevant insight, and it just becomes a matter of just those nuances that you want to double punch on a little bit. But again, it's hard to really give a very blanket point of view because it varies by initiative, it varies by category, it varies by who your target is and really where you begin from that strategic planning process.
Don't use Google Translate for your marketing.
Thank you. I was helping him answer questions, and I was throwing me under the bus. I don't think any translations tool is going to be as effective as a human being who knows the language. And thank you for setting me up. You shouldn't just have one Mexican American or Peruvian check it because different language varies for Latinos. So thank you very much for making me bring that point to life.
Eliana, at Google, how much technology creation, development are Hispanics influencing?
I mean, it's tremendous. They're the early adopters. When we develop Google Glass, I want to see what happens when someone takes that into the barrio. How can we adapt that to Latinos? When we develop programs for small businesses, how do we make sure that that is as adaptive and relevant as possible to Latinos? A lot of the platforms we're developing are total market is kind of a funny concept for Google because when you talk to Larry, our CEO, he's been to the future and comes back to tell us about it. So he's beyond national barriers and different groups. He just thinks we're all humans and we should all experience the web equally. So he definitely thinks of the web. The mission of the company is to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. So how does that resonate for each community? His vision of the web is that we all use it the same. We all have access to it. But in the short term, we know, part of my role is educating the company that there is nuance, there is some difference. And so in the products we developed, we're thinking about, for example, Google Docs. It's a collaborative platform to write on the web, write documents. We need to think about the digital divide, for example. Access to internet connection to broadband isn't always available everywhere. We're doing what we can with fiber and other products to bring that to communities. But if that can't load properly in a low-income high school, we need to sit with engineers and make sure that they're thinking about not just high-speed internet access in Silicon Valley, that's a blessing to be in that space, but when my mom, who's a high school teacher, can't do a curriculum with her students on Google Docs and the kids are complaining, Maestra, I can't load this, it's my job to come to sit with the engineer and say, how can we adapt this, make sure it's as accessible as possible, because that's as relevant in Southern California, in Oxnard, where I'm from, as it is in Africa, where we're also playing a big role. So these are connected communities that are all getting on the web. These domestic emerging markets, as we call it, are very important. So our products are only as good as the people who can actually access them and use them. So it's very important to keep that conversation in mind and the realities of the divide as well.
Before we open it for questions, I want the four of you to tackle what predictions you have for Hispanic trends over the next 3 years.
I think Latinos are about to create a revolution on technology. If they determine the presidential election, they can definitely determine the future of technology. And it's remarkable because we're already doing that. So in 3 years, I can't even imagine what that'll look like. We may see Google Glass in a Latino color on someone's face down the street. I mean, you just never know what'll happen because we are all a part of what's determining the future. We're spending more time on the devices, more time on YouTube, more time on every single platform, more than general market. So I would say Latinos aren't going to influence technology. They're the ones determining the future completely.
Jason, any forecast? Hispanic trends?
I think I'm going to have a job. So, I mean, I think...
That was kind of guaranteed.
Thank you.
I would echo that. No, I think it's what Eliana said. I think it's that their influence on technology and quite frankly, everything. I mean, the presidential election to me was so illuminating. I think us Latinos that identify recognize the power that we have in our community, but it really was a moment that sort of shook everything and people were, I mean, it's amazing that that's the influence we have on the U.S. So I think that it goes even beyond technology. I think that they're going to continue to be at the core of really everything that we do and influencing a lot of really everything in general. So technology being primary.
Well, at Nielsen, we do some predictions, but I'm not going to predict on behalf of the entire organization where I think everything is going to be moving forward. But I will tell you that I do think that, at least among the Latino market, personal devices are certainly poised for continued growth. And really, I think the one prediction I might make, and again, this is my own, is that that the personal device, if it isn't already, will become sort of the preferred platform for everything. Meaning, somewhat of a gravitation, and it is in some ways already quite significantly among the younger demographic, but in some ways sort of a step over a traditional computer and really just focusing on cell phone and other smaller digital devices. And that's really the opportunity, I think, for marketers, is how to then really have that personal one-on-one connection with a consumer and with a Hispanic consumer, and understanding what that device then means to that consumer, because then there's this sort of attitudinal relationship with this device that I think is a broader thing, maybe to explore. I've sort of been talking a lot about that theme today, this very personal, attitudinal sort of theme, and I really think there's an opportunity there to understand the device and what that means specifically for the Hispanic.
Can I add something? I know I joked around on something, but one of the things very important about the mobile device piece is that it's very important, you as marketers, not to stereotype those with less affluence to not be able to have that. And actually, for many of those, that's their primary, like you were saying, mobile first. And so sometimes we're like, oh, well, that person, they really just can't afford to have all the nice, smartphone technology. But really, that's their only mean to get to the internet. That's the way they communicate. That's
preferred.
everything for them. It's preferred. So just as a side note.
I'll add on to that. It's very true. When I explain the consumer internally, I say, we do this. We are the paradox of opportunity. We over-index in digital, and the digital divide is also very real, and the smartphone is what connects the two. Because Latinos are buying the newest and greatest smartphone that's, who knows if they can afford it or not, but they're buying it, definitely. And that may be, for a different community, the same phone may be their only way to connect to the web, and they may not even have a computer at home. This is the mobile first generation, where we're skipping the general market
Sort
went
of
from
leapfrog
the
almost.
PC to the laptop to the smartphone, then now to the tablet. This is the first time for many that they're being connected. So you're right, it's just a matter of
And that
making sure
shapes
people
the
know that.
whole experience, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Which is kind of what we've been talking about a lot today.
Yeah, they're being introduced to
Mobile
the web,
first.
many of them on their phones for the first time.
Entirely.
Yeah. My 3-year-old niece has a tablet. I'm like, I don't even know what that's going to mean for her future.
Well, do we have any questions from the audience? Hands are going up quickly. You were the first one.
Okay.
Very Latino of you.
Filmed in my city.
So I actually won't answer that, but I have a question for you. Is when you define seeing Latinos, what exactly are you thinking of seeing? Are you kind of thinking the stereotypical Latino, or what is it that you're craving to see? Yeah, the reason why I asked that is I think that there's a fine balance when you think about what is Latino, and the other side of that coin, and sort of your point is then you're stereotyping Latinos by making them all, curvy girls with long brown hair and makeup, and you could put that or cast that, and I'm not speaking to advertising, just in general, entertainment in a role, but then the flip side is, oh, that's so stereotypical, right? When you start leveraging talent that might be not look stereotypically Latino, then they don't necessarily get recognized. So it's like, it's a conundrum, and that's why I can't answer it, because I think it's, you're kind of on both sides going to get a little slack. So for me, it's tough to really, it's a tough solve.
I think we're not going to give you an answer of why that hasn't changed. I think the answer is, though, it's the same thing we've talked about. It's the data, making sure people who are producing this content are aware of the data of how much their audience is driven by Latinos. For example, in movies, Latinos drive 40% of all movie sales now, and they're more likely to watch a movie on opening weekend. That's huge, and I think, the film industry is becoming aware of that. Their challenge is how to do that tactfully and don't have someone look like they sold out, but don't be stereotypical. We also, as Latinos, everyone's hating on something. You didn't do it right, and we'll all have our own opinion of what's right. But I will say, I'll give a shout out to the National Hispanic Media Coalition. They're doing a lot of great work to try to get Latinos on screen and into commercials and other outlets. It's not my space, but I hope to see that change too.
We got another question over here. Yes.
Sure. That is a fantastic question. Everyone who knows me knows I've been waiting to see if someone would bring it up. The question was, there's a new domain coming called .uno, and the objective is to create a Spanish language internet. I'm actually excited to share that .soy is coming. I am elianamurillo.soy. And the idea, I'll answer what soy is and then I'll answer what uno is, because they're pretty distinct. A little bit difficult to compare, but I would say that both are relevant to this audience, of course. So .soy, the idea is that it is a space for the bicultural, bilingual U.S. Hispanic. Soy is the word used to identify yourself, but it's actually a bilingual space where the content can be in English or Spanish. Everything we talked about, how do you navigate what language an audience wants. Soy will allow consumers to interact with the web in a different way. It is kind of an identifier for content. As Google, we will never ask someone, are you Hispanic or not, because that's not appropriate as an internet company. We won't ask for that private information. But you can target content instead, and everything we've said today is about content. That's coming in the near future, so I share that with you here. To the point of .uno, it's interesting, a Spanish language internet. I'd love to see what happens there, especially with the bicultural nature and bilingual nature of the audience, just to see how people leverage that space. I think so the point is, the context is that we're running out of .coms. The internet, the pace of growth is slowing down because there aren't enough .coms. So new domains are coming. This is all information available on the internet right now. So .dad is coming, .eat. And the idea is that it's interest-based content, in the sense of bringing kind of community interests on the web. And so I'm excited to see, what happens with .uno. I'm very excited to see what happens with .soy, and I'll be buying my name, and I'm excited to see what other brands do with that. Google.
Over there, and then we'll get to you. Over there.
So to reiterate the question, why are you're sharing but not allowed talking back?
Yes. So when we say, for example, tell us what you think if you get, 280 likes in 2 seconds. We're asking them to tell us. And we ask them in Spanish, but we get a lot of likes. So that's very easy a pattern. So we wanted to know if you have a similar experience or you have any insights.
I think it's an empowerment question. It's about do Latinos feel like they have a voice, and is it their place to speak their mind? And if I post something, is someone going to rant back? I think it's the normal conversation in the room. Sometimes we ask, are there any questions, any comments, and no one raises their hand. It's the same behavior on the web. And sometimes you hope that they'll do something different because it's just a matter of typing a few keys. But you have to think, again, it's people, and are they really wanting to share their concerns? So in many ways, if I could offer best practice, I think it's a matter of finding a community. On Google Plus, we have actual communities, they're called, and you can find people with shared interests. And I'm sure on other platforms you can do similarly. But if you can find a community where people feel safe and they're willing to share and they know that their peers won't kind of criticize what they're saying, just posting online and expecting people to just rant and share things. I'm not as fortunate to have the room here who is very open to talking, but that's a little bit different online. So I think it's a matter of just keeping in mind, what would you expect in person? How does it translate onto the web? And the web is full of a lot of people they've never met before, so it's a little bit of a different dynamic in that sense. I think it's a fair question. Oftentimes, you don't see them talking back on that specific post or on that platform, but the conversation does leave elsewhere. Another plug for Google Plus, which I think is interesting, is when I share something, let's just say I post a picture from this event, and a bunch of my colleagues share it, I can actually look at the ripples. So how far did that post go? So if you're literally thinking, how do I do it on the platform? I click a little triangle on the corner, it says show ripples, and I can see how many times it was publicly shared or privately, and it becomes a web where you can see the growth. So they may not be speaking about it, but they may be sharing in ways that you right now aren't really trafficking or really identifying how dense is that network. If I share with Nydia and her community is huge and that gets reshared, it doesn't start and end with just one post. It needs to travel, and you have to be able to follow that across the web.
We had one question back here. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Obamacare campaign and how they try to actually reach the Latino young and invisible, because without the young and invisible or millennial Latinos, the Obamacare plan is not really very successful, right? We need them in order to support all of the older, we can say. So, and unfortunately, the Latino people that have enrolled in the different Obamacare plans is still very high. So they cannot really say that it has been successful. So as Hispanic marketers, what would you guys done different so it would actually be successful?
How much are you paying me to answer that question? I don't have,
Are you with Obamacare?
yeah.
Because people are attributing your quote to me and I want to fix it.
I mean, that's a let's get into the politics side of it, and then there's so many. Really is. I mean, let's be honest. But young Latinos, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
good place to start.
I would, removing politics, I think if it's a product, think of it as a product. The product, I won't even talk about what it is or who's behind it. In promoting a product, I think you have to be patient in initial success. You have to do online promotion and on traditional and grassroots. It's a little bit of everything. And with Latinos, new doesn't always go over well. Latinos have to be convinced by a family member this is the right thing to do. They need to have trust in it. How do you humanize a product? So, yeah, how much are you paying us to consult them? I think it's just more of how is it relevant to us as individuals, really. When I make sure that my family's signing up for health insurance, I want to have a conversation with them to make sure that they know the value and why it's important. So I hope that those conversations are happening.
I mean, I think I've seen similar studies with similar type of initiatives where, I mean, anything you have to realize, I mean, there are some cultural nuances, I think that might be an issue to play into that, the cultural nuances.
And I think we have time for one more question.
I have a question for Stacy and Leah. You were saying, that Hispanics are big in
I'll let you. Well, I'll start, and then I'll let you take it. Yeah, I'm not sure that that's actually what our research shows, and our research shows actually the converse, that Latinos purchase quite a significant amount online and in a variety of categories. And actually, we have the report that I mentioned that we'll be talking about later has some hard statistics on that, and I think mainly that's because the level of connectivity. The Latinos are so much more connected, and I think as Eliana said earlier, with the phone or a smaller platform really being the main conduit to the internet in many cases, or the preferred, as we sort of opined might be, it's just sort of a natural transition, to making a purchase. So that's not what our research shows, and maybe we're looking at at something different. But I can let you speak maybe from Target's perspective.
Yeah, and obviously I can't share a lot of proprietary information, but I think that I agree with you, Stacy, in that I think that that's probably a myth that has been around for quite some time. And it's interesting, I've been in retail for a very long time. I was, at companies where we're like, oh, but they're not transacting online, and the reality is that they actually are, and they're over-indexing on that. So again, I think that goes back to our point earlier on how the Hispanic market is really influencing everything on all aspects, technology, and I think it's a matter of just, again, looking at the data and let that guide you.
Yeah, be sort of the guardrails we talked about.
And I think that's completely accurate. We see that data too. They are buying online. For those who aren't, I think it's a matter of looking like how do you get more of the market to shift in that way. I think it's about trust. And the reality is that people want to go to the store with their families, and Latinos go shopping together. They want to look it up online, and they may not purchase it on the website, but they are making the purchase somewhere else. Biggest consumer group in the country, they're going to go buy it, and they're going to buy a few of them because they buy in bulk. So they're going to go together. And the other reality is, in terms of commerce, do Latinos we're seeing the shifts, but the question is always, are they using credit cards as often? Do they prefer to make transactions with cash? That is shifting Latino. The whole market is moving toward, traits that are the same as general market. They're buying as their buying patterns are very similar to general market now. But some of them may be more recent arrivals or people who have more traditional values in the sense of let's all go as a family together, let's not buy online. I don't think that's the dominant case anymore, but still true. It still happens. We definitely know that that's, I know that you may be speaking from personal experience, and sometimes it depends on category. Perhaps the category you are in, those transactions are better made in store. Sometimes it depends on what they're buying. If it's too big to ship and they don't have like for example, I move a lot because of my job. I actually don't have a permanent mailing address where I want to have something shipped, so sometimes it's easier for me to just go buy it in person. Just kind of depends on the individual, but I think the trends are going in that direction.
We'll talk together. No, I think what it is really is that we know in general the Hispanic market loves to shop. There's no denying that, whether it's online or in store, but there is the balance of they may be shopping in store not because they're not comfortable with transacting online. A lot of it is that we're just more experiential shoppers. We love to touch and feel and look, and really the whole shopping experience is a part of it. So I wouldn't necessarily, even if we're seeing numbers maybe not moving as quickly or as strong as general market, attribute it to the lack of trust maybe online. It's just our preference might be to just go in store and actually see the product in person.
And I would add that even with that, there's a significant amount of pre-purchase research that takes place online. So while it may be a cultural thing, it may not be, but the end point of purchase, where that actually happens, whether it's in store or online, shouldn't dilute from all of that sort of pre-purchase experience and pre-purchase research that does indeed take place online.
Well, I'm sure we can stay chatting about this for quite some time, but I'm getting the signal that we have to quit.
I just want to add, since I know we're going to break, some of you under your chairs have a small gift from Target, so take a peek. And if you didn't get one under your chair, know that you'll get something on the way out. So wanted to end on that fun note.
I want to just take a quick picture.
Thank you to our panelists.
Don't worry. You say no.
Oh, Ellen DeGeneres.
Yes, we're doing an Ellen DeGeneres selfie style. So you have the longest arms. Will you take it? And then I need your handles. I have yours, I think. You know how to do it, right? Wait, hang on, turn it around. It's got to be selfie style, otherwise it doesn't count. Power panel. Wait, how am I going to get in there? You got to get in here too. Wait.
No, we're doing selfie.
Wait, I don't want to be so close.